Let's break that summit down a little bit more with Giorgio Cafiero in Washington, D.C. He's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics, a geopolitical risk consulting firm. Giorgio, good to have you on TRT World. Now, what did you make of that final communique from the summit? A condemnation of Israel's actions in Gaza and a call for the international community to take action instead of just talking about what's happening there.
I think it's quite vague, to be frank. There were a number of states which had their representatives, their leaders at this summit, and they were calling for more concrete action against Israel. By this, we're talking about prohibiting the use of U.S. military bases for the purposes of arming Israel, leveraging economic clouts, energy clouts to put pressure on different actors and Israel to halt this bombing campaign, severing of diplomatic relations with Israel. There were a number of countries, though, that had a problem with that, and therefore the members of the Arab League and OIC that were attending the summit were not able to reach a consensus. This really speaks to many of the important geopolitical divisions in the wider Arab Islamic world that are preventing these countries from reaching a consensus in favor of more concrete action against Israel. And so now we had this final statement, which was relatively vague and does not really commit the countries to any serious action right now.
And when you talk about it being so vague, even though they've asked for others in the international community to take more action, how many of those countries in attendance will be taking action themselves, where we know that several have actually normalized ties with Israel? Saudi Arabia before October 7th was very close to doing the same. So how many will actually listen to their citizens who have taken to the streets to protest what's happening in Gaza and actually either sever ties with Israel or do something more?
It's a great question. We need to keep in mind that many of these countries are very tied to the United States. They depend on a lot of assistance from the United States. Many of them exist under the U.S. security umbrella. Some of these countries, such as the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain, they're in the Abraham Accords camp. They normalized diplomatic relations with Israel back in 2020. They're certainly putting out statements condemning the conduct on Israel's part, but I don't think we could necessarily expect them to abrogate the Abraham Accords at all. They want to benefit from having normalized relations with Tel Aviv. But as you do point out, there is a lot of anger, a lot of rage in the wider Arab Islamic world. There's also anger and rage from their own citizens. So there's definitely a delicate balancing act they have to strike, but they're going to be different from countries like Iran and Syria, which are outrightly opposed to the United States. These countries still want to maintain their alliances and their partnerships with the United States. So I think there's a limit as to how far they're going to go in terms of concrete action against Israel that would risk creating very serious problems in their relationships with Washington and Western European capitals.
And I think you've put it so well when you say this is all a delicate balancing act, because countries have to take into consideration what their citizens want, what their moral beliefs are, but then also look at the political and economic dynamics of all of this. So when Arab and Muslim leaders call on the UN Security Council to adopt a decisive and binding resolution to, and I'm quoting here, stop Israel's aggression in Gaza, how much weight does that then hold at the UN?
Well, the problem is the United States sits on the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member, and it obviously has its veto authority. So the leaders of all these Arab and Muslim countries can make those calls day in and day out. But until Washington changes its foreign policy, that's basically just rhetoric.
Giorgio Cafiero, good to speak to you and get your take on all of this live there from the U.S. Capitol.